David Levy and Paul Vadiato, who bring you more than a combined 25 years of practical experience, helping thousands of family caregivers, helping them find solutions to the challenges and frustrations presented by this important responsibility. So if you are in the position of caring for a spouse or a parent, a loved one who is no longer able to care for themselves, or if you know someone who is, this hour will be worth the listening. Now, let's tune in to today's edition of Caregiver Reality with your hosts, David Levy and Paul Vadiato.
Good evening, South Florida, America, and the world. It's Tuesday at 5 o'clock here on the East Coast, and this is the Caregiver Reality Hour, and hopefully you're out there and you're listening to us on WWNN 1470 AM here in South Florida, caregiverreality.com. You can watch us and listen at the same time. We're on iHeartRadio, so anywhere in the world, you have no excuse not to listen. And WWNN1470.com is also another station where you can watch and listen. AMP2.TV, they've got us live, and also during the week, our producer, Freddie, runs it as almost a mini television station. That's the future is streaming internet, and we're here first. We own caregiving, you know that. And tonight we're still discussing this month's special needs children. We have with us a very special guest. Her name is Chrissy. I've known her for a number of years. She's a mom, she's a caregiver. It's a very unique kind of a situation. You won't hear it told in many other places, but you're going to hear it here tonight. And please stay tuned, because I think it's not so much about the disease per se, it's about the role of mom. It's the role of a 14-year-old daughter who is not only coming into her own as a young woman, but dealing with a disease and a condition that A, she didn't ask for, it's genetic, and B, trying to fit all that into her world. And so I think you'll find it illuminating. Those of you, as I have, that have special needs children will find it something that you can relate to. It will resonate, and it doesn't make a difference what it is that your child has, from autism spectrum to you pick the disease. Parents, especially moms with daughters, all right, as caregivers. So anyway, good evening, Chrissy.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Hi, Chrissy. Our pleasure. And as we start every week off, Paul.
Oh, hi, David. How are you today?
Today's been a crazy day in the world of caregiving, and as I always do each week, how was your week,
Thank
Paul?
you. First of all, I want to say thank you, everyone out there, for joining us again this week, and we appreciate you listening every week. A week ago today, my bride had surgery up in the heart, in the upper regions of her neck, which was very, very painful. So she's a week out from recovery. So she is not in the best of spirits, and right now she's needing a lot of help. So my caregiving has been extraordinarily busy, and I've been going to fetch a lot of things.
Right. The honey-do list is a long one.
It doesn't go away, and there's no leprechauns coming in the middle of the night.
Right. Well, at least I guess that's a benefit.
It's a benefit.
Never knowing what it is that leprechauns are supposed to do.
How's Suzette doing?
Suzette has not had a great week. As I said to the audience last week, her condition is such that we never know what's going to stop working. And so once again, her gut has stopped working. She has moved up from 8 to 8.5 months pregnant. In physicality.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was going to say, but I'm glad you clarified.
Right. At her age, I think that we did not need. It's not even a change of life baby. It's end of life baby, if that were to be the case. But not true in terms of end of life. But it's been very difficult.
She's got to be uncomfortable.
She's very uncomfortable. The dogs have been tasked with extra responsibilities this week in terms of taking care of her. I have to tell you a quick funny story. I had mentioned it to you, but the neighborhood that I live in, not only do we have 4 dogs, but we have a cat that has adopted us, and so when I go to pick up the dog food, I have to pick up a 24-pack of cat food so that morning and night the cat gets fed. We also live on a lake. And so if you live in South Florida, you certainly know that we have ducks. And the ducks of late, Mama Duck leads them to my front walkway, guards the walkway, and the ducks go up and down for exercise, for whatever, socialization, I have no idea. Yesterday morning I came out and I put the can of cat food down for the cat, and all of a sudden Mama Duck comes over, moves the cat out of the way, and before I realized it, the 5 ducklings finished the can of cat food. I had to close the garage door, go to the front door and go, Stella, Stella, and she comes creeping up the walkway, and I had to put out another can of food for her. So let me tell you, we have brazen ducks. They may be Muscovies, but they're fearless.
But you make a very good point, because our cat, Katie, it's amazing how intuitively they know when someone they love not feeling well.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, I tell you, she has been by Debbie's side this last week inseparably.
And we have the same thing. Angus, who is my dapple red dachshund and is also kind of like Florence Nightingale, will not leave.
I've seen the white hand,
yes.
actually. Yes.
Will not leave her side. And now if I could only get him to cook and fetch medication a little more effectively, we would have a hell of a team there. But, so all I can say, folks, is we try and put a small amount of humor and reality into a week that both of us have been through that's very difficult. And caregiving,
our support system starts about 8 a.m. The two of us getting on the phone with one another.
Yep, and most importantly, this afternoon I was doing one of my support groups at Arden Court, and Arden is one of our sponsors, and so I truly enjoy doing it there. But for whatever the reason, and it's still the dead of summer, caregivers are coming out of the woodwork, and everybody is looking for not even so much solutions, just to understand what they're in the middle of and where is it going. And, I think that's one of the services in doing support groups that over the years I'm not trying to be self-serving, but I've become pretty good at is understanding where people are and dispensing reality without hitting them over the head. And I hope that those listeners, and boy, our audience has been growing, understand that that's what we try and do each week in helping you as caregivers, even if you're not a caregiver yet, but you see it coming, you've done it, and you'll probably be doing it again. This program is for you. We call it Caregiver Reality, not because it's a reality show that's meant to point out people as being, unusual or way outside the box. It's to recognize that caregivers, those who are taking care of others that can no longer do it for themselves or possibly never could, that you're not alone. It's not something that nobody else understands, but it's part of the responsibility that Paul and I have undertaken, both as a career and by coming on the air and streaming live, is to bring you information, but also to let you know as a caregiver, you're not alone. You are part of 50, 60 million people in this country alone, and probably a bigger number than that, because not everybody understands what a caregiver is and just views themselves as a good spouse, a good child, a good whatever, and never really consider themselves to be caregivers. And one of the things we'll be discussing with Chrissy tonight is trying to separate out early on in life the difference between being mom and being a caregiver. It's no different than all of a sudden going from spouse, as you and I have had, Paul, I for a little longer than you, the distinction between a spouse and what you can do in a spousal relationship versus what you do when your spouse is also relying on you to be a caregiver.
And I think the point of that, it matters not if we're talking about a child or we're talking about an adult or we're talking about someone who is older. caregiving is caregiving, and everyone is going to be facing those challenges of problem solving, dealing with stress, coping, and maybe the most perplexing of all, dealing with the system to get help for the ones that we really care about. It is so extraordinarily hard because it seems at times the deck is stacked against us.
Well, not only is it stacked against us, but we have an innate issue. Caregiving is not something that we innately learn. It's not just like the maternal instinct. You get a child and, notwithstanding Dr. Spock and 100 others that have written a book on how to raise your kid.
Or Mr. Spock.
Or Mr. Spock, right. But caregiving in and of itself is complex, it's complicated, it's confusing. And most of all, it's counterintuitive. Just when you think you understand it based on all of your intuition and the skill sets that you've learned reaching a certain point in life, you realize that they don't work in this situation. And one of the reasons that it doesn't work the way it ought to is A, caregiving is a little on the unique side, and it's very difficult for us to have a perspective when we are emotionally involved in the issue.
Oh, of course. I mean, when we do it professionally, it's very easy to speak of what needs to be done.
Well, we can be somebody
Chrissy,
else's AWAC. You know, I can see your problem, but when it comes to me, I'm just as perplexed and confused as the next person. It's not a question of having the expertise to be a caregiver. It's having the perspective to be a caregiver. And therein lies what I consider to be one of the most essential ingredients, and that is to recognize that you're a caregiver. Get thee to a support group, good, bad, or otherwise. You have the opportunity to be around others, even if their situation is different from yours. The thread that runs between you is the fact that you are caring for another outside the norm of just, the flu or chicken pox. And it makes a very big difference. And to the audience out there, wherever you may be in the world, whatever it is you're dealing with as a caregiver, we recognize that. We may not be able to solve, and we make it very clear, we're not clinicians. We can't solve, mom's diabetes or somebody's Alzheimer's, but we certainly understand what it takes to be an effective caregiver and to point out what it takes beyond just another list of take good care of yourself. What does that really mean? All right? How do you do it? And what are the things that are really important? And that's what this show is all about. It's not to preach to you. It's a combination of to teach a little bit, but to be very empathetic and understand who you are. You're not looking for our sympathy, and we're not looking to have a pity party.
And I think the word empathy cannot be overstated. It's that I walk alongside of you, and I'm there for you, and it's not, as you say, a pity party or it's sympathy. And so many people feel uncomfortable around caregivers. They don't know what to say. And sometimes silence is the best thing to say, and to grab somebody's hand and just say, I understand and I care for you.
And many people are scared of caregiving and what they see coming.
Well, you may catch it.
Well, of course, it's an absolute, the caregiver virus. Oh my God, it's worse than Ebola. But the point is that after you've told your story to your friends and your relatives for about the 35th time or 350th time, they don't want to hear it anymore. They don't have a solution. You sound like a broken record, except that the day changed and maybe the particular incident changed. Right. But what are they supposed to do? All right? And, unfortunately, that's when people start to pull back. All right? Not that they don't mean well. They don't know what to do, and in the absence of knowing what to do, they'll do nothing. And rather than confront it with nothing to do, they'll just drop you. And that's an unfortunate set of circumstances, but more and more we see it in caregiving. Paul, before we go to our first station break...
Is it that time already?
Oh, it almost is.
Good Lord.
All right, but last week you were on, and the week before you'd been at the Purposeful Planning Institute out in Colorado, where you were meeting with not only peers, but I will give you all the credit in the world intellectually, but you certainly were in very strong company.
There were a lot of initials after a lot of names.
Yep, I know, and it's initial soup. But you brought them a message that most of them had not heard before in the context of professionally what they do. Many of them were wealth advisors, attorneys, even doctors, lawyers, and they deal with their clients and help them plan in whatever their particular category may be. But you took to them the concept of the missing piece of planning, which was family caregiving.
Yes.
And the ripple effect, because I know I've been on all the conference calls this past week or so, has been astounding. The pot you stirred up and the people that you have gotten to respond have been remarkable.
Well, it's the old, you don't know what you don't know. And while there's a lot of technical planning that these experts do, and they're extraordinary, their writings are legendary, when it comes to this issue, it's just not one that is talked about. It's not one that is seen. And when their clients are going through it, they don't know what to do. They've never been trained. And part of what our mission was, David, and give yourself credit because you were on the calls with me as we did our meetings, it's that we are bringing awareness to them, and we are saying that there are experts. We are there. And we are there to help them to help their clients. And if they're not doing this kind of planning, they're letting go an important piece of what needs to be done for that family. And sometimes it's a 2-3 generational family that is struggling, and those questions are just never asked.
And I see it even through my support groups. I'll be dealing with a spouse in their late 60s, early 70s who's dealing with their spouse, let's say, that has dementia. But their son is dealing with his wife that has MS, and their granddaughter is dealing with an autism spectrum grandchild. And so you've got 3 generations of caregiving going on, each at its own level, each at its own intensity, and completely different one from the other, both by disease, relationship, even though a 40-year-old spouse is still a spouse in the concept of a 70-year-old being a spouse, but generationally they're far apart. It's hard to relate. These are different kinds of illnesses, but yet the common thread is that somebody is depending upon you to help make their life workable while they're trying to figure out in their role as caregiver how to keep their life workable. And therein lies the enigma. It's very hard to pick up a book and learn how to be a caregiver because it's so unique.
Yeah, I thought what was really interesting is that what we had done for those that are listening at the Purposeful Planning Institute Rendezvous, which occurs once a year, we presented an actual case study of clients that David and I had actually dealt with, and it was an extraordinarily complex case with many moving parts. And as we laid out the fact pattern to these professionals from as many as 20 different disciplines, each one saw it from their own perspective rather than seeing it as an interconnective, collaborative piece. And that's what we're all about in purposeful planning, is collaborative excellence. And I think what we were able to do is to show them that together we are greater than we are individually, and we need to have as many of these experts at the table as we can. And to their credit, as you know on these calls this week, they are truly rising to the occasion. And I think
they want to learn.
They want to learn, and they're going to make this a big part of it. So I feel very good about the work that we did when we were out there.
Yeah, and one of the things, if the audience remembers, a few weeks back we had on Vicki Kine, who is a worldwide recognized bioethicist, and she was in the group that we were facilitating when we gave out this fact pattern, as it were, that
story of a family.
A story of a family. And the other people in the room said, I can't believe this. This must have been made up. And we said, no, the names have been changed to protect the innocent. And afterwards, Vicki said, they don't understand. We deal with this every day.
That's right.
And so there was nothing unique except for the fact that the group that was there had never been introduced to our discipline, to our expertise, to the concept that caregiving is not just nurturing a child or that it's limited just to elders. Caregiving is everywhere. And when you watch the news every night, whether it's kids that have been wounded, families that have Ebola, I don't care what it is, inside of every one of those issues is a caregiver.
And David, just to wrap this up before we go to our break, because I want to leave enough time for Chrissy, if you follow us on Facebook, Caregiver Reality, you'll see a lot from the conference. There are pictures, there are some of the presentation materials that are there, and you'll get a good understanding of what's there. We post every day. Your comments are welcome. We want you to be part of this discussion. Caregiver Reality Facebook page, it's for you. And
Right.
Tell us what you want, and we'll make sure that it's there.
Right. And one of the things I just want to mention before we take our break, and we'll be back, just to give the audience a little bit of an understanding without getting into big highfalutin words and everything. Chrissy's daughter has a condition that's an inherited genetic problem, even though there was no indication of it from either her husband or on Chrissy's side of the family. And what it does, it affects the nerves in the body and in turn affects muscles. And so there are weaknesses in hands, there are weaknesses in legs. You may wind up needing a cast to help stand or to keep yourself upright and erect so that you're not, conditioned to look at it simply from a wheelchair. And I remember when my daughter was born and we were at Boston Children's Hospital, so many kids on that orthopedic floor were having very extensive surgery just to be able to spend their lives in a wheelchair rather than laying flat on their back. And so Chrissy will describe it in greater depth, but this is an issue that not only affects people in midlife and later life, and there are variations of it, but unfortunately her daughter has contracted it as a preteen, and now as a 14-year-old girl is trying to deal with it socially, practically, trying to be like all the other kids when at times you can't be. So we're going to go to our break, and when we come back we're going to hear from Chrissy, and we're going to hear from a mom who's been fighting a fight that she unfortunately will be fighting for a very long time.
Thank you.
Are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse or loved one who can no longer take care of himself or herself? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Do you feel burned out, frustrated, and just don't know where to turn? You've tried doctors, lawyers, and mental health professionals and have come to realize that they don't have practical answers to these questions. What you need are experts, non-clinical family caregivers with 25 years of active experience helping thousands of family caregivers like yourself. People who can help you provide a better quality of life for yourself and your loved one. Who you need are David Levy or Paul Vadiato. Reach David at caregiverreality.com or reach Paul at caregiverreality.com and let them help you pick the right path towards improving the quality of life for you, the caregiver, and your loved one. CFC support helps fund research. You can too. Each year, thousands of men and women serving their country in the U.S. military, as well as other employees of the federal government and the U.S. Postal Service, provide support for medical research to find treatments and cures for diseases. This is done through the Combined Federal Campaign, an annual workplace giving campaign that allows eligible individuals to support charities, such as those that conduct medical research, through a payroll deduction. Money donated this way to the medical research charities and its member organizations helps fund fund research to fight diseases from Alzheimer's to cancer, multiple sclerosis, blindness, breathing disorders, and much more. The diseases included afflict people of all ages, from the very young to the very old. You don't need to be a member of the military or a federal government employee to support research to help you or those you love that are suffering from an illness or disease. Donations to our not-for-profit tax-exempt organizations are tax-deductible and provide a vital source of funding in the fight to defeat some of life's most dreaded diseases. Please visit the website of the Medical Research Charities, which can be found at medicalresearchcharities.org. That's all one word, medicalresearchcharities.org. On that website, you can learn more about our member charities and make a donation in support of the research they're conducting for a specific disease or family of diseases. You can make a donation to Medical Research Charities itself and support the work of all our member charities. Please visit our website today, medicalresearchcharities.org. Become a part of joining forces to find a cure.
I am Paul Vadiato, president of CareGiver Reality and a full-time spousal caregiver. When I arrive at the office to begin my workday, my caregiving role doesn't get left outside the door. My day is often interrupted dealing with issues at home. That is time not focused on my job. I am but one of the 50 million unpaid family caregivers. Caregiving in the workplace is a costly productivity issue that is only going to increase as our workforce gets older. Caregiver-friendly firms retain hard-to-replace team members, tend to attract better talent, and get out in front of the productivity loss that exists everywhere. Now, new questions are being raised as to possible exposure to discrimination lawsuits as employees question whether their role as a caregiver is damaging them as promotions are denied or reprimands increase that might result in a termination. Caregiving in the workplace, left unaddressed, is costing your firm money, reputation, and possible litigation. CareGiver Reality brings education and training solutions to the workplace. Let our experienced team help evaluate your unique situation. Contact me at paul@caregiverreality.com. That's paul@caregiverreality.com. Do it today.
This is Caregiver Reality with gerontologist David Levy and caregiver expert Paul Vadiato, who ask you to call in and speak with him on the air toll-free at 888-565-1470. That's 888-565-1470 to share a story or important information. Now, back to today's Caregiver Reality Show.
And we're back. And before we start with Chrissy, I just want to make mention, you heard the Medical Research Charities commercial. We run it every week. They're one of our sponsors. We collaborate with them to bring caregiving to them. They actually run our website shows on their website, and each week we try and pick a one of their underlying charities, and this week it is Gateway for Cancer Research, something that we can all kind of understand and wrap our heads around. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of them. Since their beginning 20 years ago, the Gateway for Cancer Research has sought better treatment options for cancer patients that extend life, improve quality of life, and strive to cure people. They believe that the current standard of cancer research doesn't work and focus their efforts on funding research by treatment innovators, creating innovative cancer treatment that can change the lives of patients. They think it's kind of same old, and they need, out-of-the-box thinkers.
Sure.
While progress is being made, it's not enough. With each passing day, we lose mothers, daughters, fathers, and sons. Uniquely, our country's healthcare system fights nearly every other disease by curing first and understanding the cause later. However, decades of research in cancer has focused more energy on understanding the roots of the disease rather than finding the cure. Unfortunately, the cancer industry is now anchored in a singular approach, one that spends more energy on causes than cures. The Gateway for Cancer Research believes it's time to change that focus. I think they're pointed in the right direction, and if you want to understand and see more, it's www.gatewaycr.org. That's www.gatewaycr.org. CareGiver.org, and those of you that have had cancer in the family have it now. You can certainly appreciate getting behind an organization that wants to kind of blow up the paradigm and really push for a cure rather than understand causes more in depth. Starting next week, one of the things that I've asked medical charities to do is to give us a question that has come from one of their viewers on their website. The question that was sent to me today, and I'll deal with it next week, is how do you deal with a stubborn 84-year-old? Now, I'm not sure that that's a caregiver question because they didn't put it with a disease or another condition. And I think that when you get to be 84, you're entitled to be stubborn. And if you're the child of or the grandchild of an 84-year-old, I think one of the things you have to understand is there's generations of difference between what you think is important and what they do. All right, and even if you're a 60-year-old adult dealing with an 84-year-old father and you say, Dad, you have to do this, and he goes, Sonny, I changed your diapers, so don't tell me what I have to do.
Yeah, there's 20 years difference in stride between those two ages.
Absolutely, and if you've ever had brothers and sisters that are at least 10 years apart, you know, a decade is a generation. Yeah. So we'll be dealing with it, but I need to get a little more meat on the bones for exactly what that was. Otherwise, I don't know how to deal with a stubborn 84-year-old either. Anyway, Chrissy, welcome.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you for being here.
Me.
And it's our pleasure. I wish that we were talking about a subject that was a little lighter, all right? But why don't you kind of open up and explain a little bit, not so much about the disease itself, but your awareness when it kind of first started with your daughter and what led you to understand that things might be a little different than the other kids on the block.
Okay, well, when she was about 11 years old, 10 or 11 years old, we noticed that her gait started to change. She was walking a little bit differently, and her running was a little bit different, and she would walk on her toes. So we took her to the orthopedic, and he said it was her Achilles. So they were going to do
her Achilles tendon. They were like short.
Right, and they were contracted, so they were going to do some surgery and stretch it. But she had to have a clearance from a neurologist first. So when she went in for her clearance, the neurologist, long story short, said it's something neurological. So then we took her for testing.
Why did the orthopedist, excuse me for interrupting, think to ask in terms of, let's say, shortened Achilles tendons, to want a neurologist to take a look?
I think through Joe DiMaggio, that's part of their procedure.
And that's Joe DiMaggio Children's Hospital in Hollywood?
And that's what they do. They do a clearance before they do any surgery on children.
Okay.
Thank God. Because they would have done this surgery.
For no reason.
Right. It is one of the side effects of CMT.
Right.
The tendons contract and get very tight. So that was part of it. But it was more of a side effect, not the problem itself.
Gotcha.
So then we went in more in depth. She went through a lot of testing, genetic blood testing, EMGs.
Those are electromyograms that test muscle strength and contracting ability?
Correct. And the velocity and the speed from the
electrical signals.
How fast they move.
Yep.
Okay.
You guys know. And they came out that she has Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease.
Okay, and which I think we can, and those are the 3 doctors that discovered it. It's not something that goes on in your mouth because it ends in tooth.
Funny name, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So we'll just refer to it as CMT.
Correct. So they, from there, I started going to neurologists because I never heard of it, and then I come to find out neither half the doctors that we went to see. Nobody knew of it. Nobody really heard of it. Like I said, my boyfriend and I went one time to Dan Marino Center, and the neurologist walked in and handed us Google papers on
stuff that he'd researched on CMT.
Right.
But not that he knew intuitively or had been trained in.
Not at all. So we had to do a lot of further research on our own, our own advocates, to find out what this exactly was.
Right. And as it started to unfold, as you peeled back the onion, what was your How did you feel as you began to
It's
understand
almost-
the extent of the disease?
You don't really comprehend what's going on because you're almost like in shock because you have this perfectly normal child, and you know you think, oh, it's the Achilles, it's going to get lengthened a little, and then she'll be in a cast for 6 weeks, and back at it, back playing softball, playing all these sports, and then all of a sudden, it's your whole life changed. It changes in a blink of an eye. It's you have this something that's diagnosed to you, and it's your child, and it's forever, and then you're told there's no cure.
Talk about that your life has changed forever. What do you mean by that?
Well, besides your child going through all these struggles, mentally, it's very difficult because you have this vision of, you know, I'm going to get pregnant and have this beautiful child, and then when you have the child, the doctor's very healthy, everything's great, and so you move on, and then, you know, 12 years down the road, you're not expecting them to say, you know what, she has a progressive disease that's going to be debilitating for the rest of her life. And
That's a lot to swallow.
It's still shocking. It's
And
still,
she's what, 14 now?
She's
So
14.
you're in
Really
2
process
years of
that.
doing
right.
this.
It's very hard to process.
And you were working full time, were you not?
Yeah, I had worked a couple jobs at that time, right? Yeah, working full time and just trying to comprehend what was going on.
As you began to understand it, did your daughter, in any manner, other than the fact that, you know, she may have had weak ankles or that she was walking on her tippy toes, did she recognize and come back and say, Mom, there's something that just doesn't feel right?
Yes, because at school she was being made fun of. You know, oh, you know, Kennedy, you walk funny, or why do you walk on your tiptoes, or, you know, so yeah, she was recognizing it. Besides the peers, you know, regular teenage life, she had another obstacle on top of that, and it was very difficult.
I remember growing up, it's tough to be a teenage girl.
Yeah. I think that's another story in itself.
That's another show.
Yeah, that's another show. Yeah, so, but we're still going through that struggle. Because she, you know, wants to be quote unquote normal.
Okay.
So she's resisting some of the suggestions that are being made. I know in terms of school they want to make accommodations and help, and what are you finding is going on?
She won't do that. When I talk to the teacher, she doesn't want to do it. She doesn't want to stand out. So she will push through the pain, like with handwriting and her hands get cramped or something. She'll just push through and then get home and be like, Mom, my hands are really tight, and you can see the tendons because there's a lot of atrophy that's already started in her hands. So
And has her ability to, let's say, push through, notwithstanding her denial, and I'll call it denial for the moment, has it changed anything in terms of how the other kids view her? Or is she still, you walk funny?
well, she has AFOs, the ankle foot orthotics.
Okay.
So they do see that because part of this disease, the people get foot drop.
Okay.
So she
Similar to what
started-
happens to people with a stroke.
Correct, like neuropathy, yes.
Yeah.
So she has started that, so her feet and ankles are very weak. So she has to wear the AFOs, but this year she doesn't want to wear them, but her feet get too tired, then she trips a lot. So they do know, but she will not tell them what her condition is.
Right. Can you paint them to look like
They're
new
carbon
Adidas's?
fiber, so they're just like a black.
So, Chrissy, what about the normal activities that children do? The soccer and playing the games, going skating, that kind of thing. What was that like?
She played soccer. She was on a softball travel team. That's all stopped, and now all the kids go ice skating on Friday nights. So that was a dilemma. She tried the first time she went ice skating and fell a lot. So
Me too.
yeah, exactly. Ice skating's hard enough. So, but her ankles are really weak, so ice skating did not pan out for her. So she had to stop that. But we talked, and I said, you know what, Kennedy, you have to go, and it's how you make where you go and what you do that others will respond to that. So go in there. You know what? Have a good time. Your friends who are going to be your friends won't skate, and they'll hang out with you. And they did that. So now she still goes every Friday night.
That's
She
great.
just doesn't skate, and her friends hang out with her, and she has a great time.
Well, what great advice.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Right. And that's pretty intuitive because nobody told you to do that, did they?
No, but I don't want her to not do things that other kids are doing because of this obstacle. We always say it's a nuisance. We don't call it a disease.
Mm-hmm.
We say you have a nuisance or it's a condition, but I don't like the word disease, so we don't use that word.
I agree with you.
So as you're figuring this out along the way, and you're going to see doctors and you're going to see other advisors, what kind of help did you have, like on a day-to-day basis of, what am I supposed to be doing?
That was probably the most frustrating part of this whole journey that we're on, is we didn't have help. It was all the research on our own, and my mom and my boyfriend and Anne Marie and my best friend would help, and we did it all on our own because
you reinvented the wheel.
We reinvented the wheel, and then we would go and educate the doctors when we went to the appointments until we found specialists within,
And you saw one of those specialists very recently,
yeah, we
didn't
just
you?
came back from Iowa.
Okay.
Excellent doctor, Dr. Shai.
Okay, and he is a CMT.
He's a neurologist, but
Okay.
he does specialize in CMT.
All right.
He's
And
seen a lot of
did
patients.
he give you any further clarification or?
Basically, with Kennedy's gene mutation and what we talked to him about, Kennedy's going to write her own story.
Okay.
What a wonderful way to put that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what the doctor said.
And how did she respond to those words?
He was really good because he kind of told the adults more than it to
He
her.
he gave her what she could absorb.
Exactly.
That's good.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Talk about a little bit, if you would, Chrissy, about, you're so busy during the day, you got a lot going on. It's the end of the day, you're laying down, trying to go to sleep. What's life like?
Sleep is difficult, very difficult, because my mind doesn't stop. My body will stop, my body wants to rest, but my mind just does that snowball effect that I'm sure like other caregivers do. It's the worry, it's the future, it's fear, it's anxiety, it's pressure, it's, you have all this yourself,
Mm-hmm.
but then you're also worrying about your child or whoever you're
Sure.
caring for, because you have to have the strength to pull them through it. And at times at night, your mind thinks the worst. And, just like
Bad place to go to.
bad place to go to.
Right.
So you have to, redirect your mind and, know the doctors help you with that. You got to learn to find the avenues and the books and everything else and the support group and the strength through other people to get you back on track.
You had mentioned when we were talking before the show that there was a book that influenced you in how to kind of not so much cope with the disease, but allow you to cope with the circumstances.
Mhm. It was
What book was that?
Eckhart Tolle, and
Okay.
it was The Power of Now.
Why don't you just give us the elevator speech on that?
The elevator speech basically is, I think we all live in fear and anxiety of the future,
Mm-hmm.
and he taught us how to live in the present moment, to focus on what's going on now and not to have your mind play these horrible pictures or movies that it makes up, and to live in the now and enjoy it, because you know what, if you're a caregiver or not, you're not guaranteed tomorrow anyway.
So true.
How wise a reflection, and Paul and I, when we go to sleep at night, not together, all right, but we do the same thing because we've talked about it. We project ahead, what's it going to be like for our wives, what's it going to be like for us, and trying to shut your head down from that stuff and live in the moment. And as you said, we may not be here tomorrow. It all may be a moot point in terms of what we have to go through. And somebody as young as you and your daughter to have to assume that task, and I know what it's like, although obviously not the same thing and what I had to do with my daughter, but you always project ahead and trying to, I did what you did. I tried to mainstream my daughter, and it worked because hers were more tangible kinds of things. An artificial limb and having substantially being deaf was easier, obviously, than having a neurologic problem that's progressive. But nonetheless, you do stand out, You're different. How do you take on those hurdles, and how do you shut it down?
Right.
And so Eckert's book obviously made a big impact on you.
A huge impact.
And you also said that you found and joined a support group here in the South Florida area.
In West Palm Beach, we found a CMT group.
Okay.
And it was people who have lived with the condition. And I found, you know what really got me is when we went there, they're so successful. And I left there and I said, you know what? I believe that they're so successful is because they had these great obstacles to overcome, and it made them so much stronger. And I was able to show Kennedy that. And, at 14, when we're in the parking lot, it was when they're driving away, it's like, oh, that one has a Mercedes, that one has a Range Rover, so she could relate to that more. But I'm like, look at the cars they're driving. They're so well-spoken. The men own their own businesses. And it was like, would they have really been where they're at now without this condition?
Wonderful question.
Yeah.
You, when we were speaking before, you were talking about one of the frustrations that you had was with insurance companies. Without naming names, why don't you give us a little bit of an understanding?
And I'm sure anyone who's a caregiver is definitely
Oh,
going
yes.
through
We
This
all
is
know
the
that.
universal problem.
Yeah, because basically her condition, they say any neurologist can treat it. But the problem is the neurologists don't know about it. So if we go to Orlando to see Dr. Finkel and the Nemours Children's Hospital, they don't want to cover that because they'll say, well, in Fort Lauderdale you could go to a neurologist. So they don't want to pay for it. And then they don't want to pay when we go to Iowa, and they said, well, you already saw one doctor, there's no cure for it, why are you going to the one in Iowa? So they don't want to pay for that. So it's a constant, let's go and do it and then fight the battle when I return.
So it's not only taking care of your daughter, it's maintaining yourself, maintaining paperwork, constantly filling out forms on the phone,
Fighting the system.
fighting the system, and at the end of the day going to bed exhausted, but yet you can't fall asleep.
And you can't fall asleep.
Welcome to the world of caregiving.
Yep.
Exactly
Boy, we have
correct.
all been there and done that.
Yes.
And, one of the things that's so nice to see is that in spite of all the things you're going through, you have a face that just lights up the room. You have a
Thank
smile that's almost infectious. Your ability to talk about this and keep your composure and recognize not only from the book, but in the reality of staying in the moment. You do that beautifully.
You do.
Thank you.
Before we run out of time, this is an opportunity to talk to those that are out there that are fighting a similar battle. Speak to them. What do you want them to leave with at the end of the day?
Well, I always felt guilty, and I felt like I always had to be strong, because everyone's like, Chrissy, you're so strong, always be strong, But it's okay to go through those stages. It's okay to grieve. Who you're caring for is totally different now, and have the anxiety and be down for a while and be sad for a while, but don't live there.
Don't wallow in it.
No, and find, if it's a support group, if it's a book, if it's your mom, if it's your boyfriend, if it's your best friend, whatever gives you that strength, get it. Because whoever you're caring for needs it from you.
And you need it from someone else.
And you
It's
have
kind of
to
like
give,
play it
you
forward,
have to
isn't
get
it?
it, because you can't do it on your own. That's the thing I learned the most is, as much as I'm stubborn and I want to do it on my own, I can't.
And that's a message that intrinsically, even though you've only been a caregiver for a few years, I can tell you after doing this for more than a quarter of a century is the message that all caregivers need to recognize. No matter how strong you are, no matter how wide you want to spread your shoulders and try and bull your way through, you can't do it alone.
No way.
You need help. You need the recognition of others of what you're doing. You need a perspective that how you're doing it makes sense. And you also need to understand, while you're trying to plow through it, that you better take good care of yourself.
Yep.
Because if you're not here, even though you have good friends and grandma, there's nobody that's going to get your daughter through this better than Mom.
Right, and like Paul said, I got to stand beside her. I got to be her strength.
You absolutely do.
Yeah.
And be your own strength
Correct.
along the way. Chrissy, if there are listeners out there who have questions or they want to just find out more about this, if they direct their questions to either Paul or David at caregiverreality.com, would you be willing to
I would love to.
address
One of the
them?
reasons I came on is because people have helped me along the way, and I would love to help.
You're playing it forward, huh?
I would love to.
All right. Well, so if you have a question for Chrissy, whether it's specific to CMT or whether it's just want to talk to a mom that's going through what you may be going through, although not the same illness or disease, that's David, just like you're here, at caregiverreality.com, or Paul at caregiverreality.com. If you give us some contact information, we'll pass it on to Chrissy, and she can get back to you and decide, and believe me, widening a network of support, talking to somebody like a Chrissy who's come through what you're going through and what you've gone through in terms of helping her is part of, we talk about collaborative. Caregivers are very, very collaborative. They want to help. Freddie will tell you, when we film our support groups, they are a family. They are the closest group of people that you could ever imagine that are non-affiliated with one another, except for the fact that they're all caregivers. And that's the strength of caregiving. And Chrissy, you have just told it like it is. I mean, I can't tell you what it means for this audience, for all of us, to hear how you have tackled a problem with your daughter, what your daughter is facing, how she's trying to deal with it. And one of the things that I would really like, in about 6 months or so, only because it's a chunk of time, I would love for you to come back and give us the next update on how
would
well
love
the
to.
two of you are doing.
Because you're in our family now.
I know, thank you. It's great.
All right, and so thank you again. You've been terrific. We only have a few more minutes. I did want to give you a little bit of information. There was a lawsuit that came down in Los Angeles this past week, and it says the court said that paid caregivers can't sue if they're injured by an Alzheimer's patient. So, those of you that are getting paid to take care of Grandpa and his Alzheimer's, and if he takes a swing at you and knocks your teeth out,
The stubborn 84-year-old?
right, exactly, do not expect to be compensated by the fact that it was happened in somebody else's house. The home health care worker hired to assist unruly Alzheimer's patients may not sue their employers for injuries that the patient inflicts. The California Supreme Court decided Monday in a 5-2 decision. They said employers have no liability as long as the caregiver was warned of the risks and the injury was caused by symptoms of the disease. The ruling applies to in-home aides hired through an agency. Those hired to manage a hazardous condition may not sue their clients for injuries caused by the very risks they were retained to confront. Now, this is only California, and it's a Supreme Court ruling in California, but it has widespread implications. And I think the home health care industry and everybody involved in hiring a caregiver needs to be aware and make sure that, here they're assuming that the caregiver has the proper training to deal with an Alzheimer's patient. And don't make that assumption without checking. Don't hire somebody that you wouldn't put in the house with your daughter, with your granddaughter, with any child. Don't assume because they show up at the front door, unless you've checked them out, you've checked out the agency or whatever it may be, that they know what they're doing. And caregivers, those of you for hire, don't assume that if you get hurt on the job that you can just turn around and sue. You're expected to know how to deal with the problem. That's what you were hired for.
If I may, David, and
Yes, you may,
I know we
Paul.
have a minute or two left. was taking my wife the other day for a follow-up visit to the doctor, and as we were walking to the car, there was an elderly lady who was getting out with the help of an aide, and she was going to be using a wheelchair. And the entire time this was going on, the home health aide
Or the aide.
Was on the cell phone, totally ignoring what was going on with this woman getting in the car. And I spoke to our good friend Scott, and I said, how is this generally done? And he says the standard is when they are working with someone who they're caring for, they do not get on the phone, they do not tend to personal things. And if you see that happening, you need to say something.
Yep. We all have to protect. It's not so much to admonish somebody, but it's to remind them that the job they've been hired for is not to ignore the person that they've been there to help. And so as we get close to the end, again, Chrissy, you were wonderful. Thank you for appearing, and
Thank you very
I
much.
hope you've enlightened a few people about what it's like to be a mom and a caregiver. And to South Florida, America, and the world, thank you for listening. This has been the Caregiver Reality Hour. We'll be back next week. We have another mom. This is a mom of an older adult Down syndrome adult that has now got Alzheimer's, and she will not only explain everything she's gone through as a mom, but now this ending piece with Alzheimer's has further complicated things. Paul?
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for listening, and caregivers, take good care of yourself. Good night.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Reality Show. Each week, David Levy, a gerontologist, and Paul Vadiato, a caregiver expert with a combined over 25 years of experience, providing practical and realistic help to caregivers struggling to keep up with the needs of a loved one who are unable to care for himself or herself. To reach David Levy, email him at david@caregiverreality.com. Or to reach Paul Vadiato, email paul@caregiverreality.com. And find out more online. Just go to caregiverreality.com. See you next week for another exciting show of Caregiver Reality.